Hi, good morning, everyone. I will have the pleasure today to stand in front of you and talk about AI and artificial intelligence in dispute resolution. That pleasure is made slightly more stressful because I'm completely aware that many people in this room know considerably more about the technical capabilities of AI than me. That is, however, exactly the point. I'm a disputes lawyer and do not have the same technical background as many of you. So naturally, I will know less about the potential uses of AI from a technical standpoint than many of you. But what I can tell you about are the needs and applications of these tools in the daily lives of the legal profession and how much room there is still for improvement. And I'm hoping that this will allow us to spend the next 2 days talking about the overlap that is there. So let's start with an overview of potential applications. You can see on the current slide a summary of the legal tasks that lawyers like me and many others in this room deal with on a daily basis. Almost all of these tasks, and we will go through one by one in a minute, have the potential to be greatly assisted by AI and similar technical tools. The exact scope of these tasks will be highly dependent on the exact circumstances of the case in front of you. These tasks will look a certain way in the context of an international commercial arbitration case that spans multiple jurisdictions and may relate to billion-dollar disputes. Such cases are the cases that my professional life focuses on. They can also look vastly different, though, in the context of national litigation and the assessment of straightforward cases that, especially if they can be dealt with on a mass basis. So you really have to think about them in the specific circumstances that they arise. One of the workshops that will take place later today and tomorrow will focus on the exact way in which AI can support justice in small states and the specific circumstances surrounding those states, keeping in mind that small states are among both the very richest and poorest countries in the world and have very different forms of commerce. I will try today to give you a general overview of the landscape of AI in dispute resolution, and then we can look at the details surrounding small states in the workshop later. So let's start with a task that is often considered to be a core task for any lawyer, although maybe less so in a dispute resolution context, which is contract drafting. When you ask, for example, an M&A lawyer today, they will tell you that they will start with when they have to create a contract, they will start with a contract template from what they used in previous cases, and they will adapt that template to the specific transaction in front of them. That will result in many hours spent by that lawyer and his team, combing through hundreds of pages of contractual language and considering which tweaks to make and which language to include to address the specific circumstances in question. You can easily see how AI can add significant efficiency gains in this context. There are already AI tools out there on the market that claim that they can help transactional lawyers draft contracts and propose adequate language for the case at hand. Whether that claim is even remotely true, at the moment at least, depends as always on the circumstances. There are definitely legal areas where the required contract output is relatively straightforward, and it's relatively straightforward enough and similar enough to other cases that AI tools can produce at least excellent first drafts when given the right inputs. You will still need a manual review by a human afterwards, after the first draft has been produced, but that is much easier and can be done much more quickly than drafting it from scratch, obviously, even if using a template. Obviously, the accuracy of the output depends entirely on the accuracy of the input. You can imagine a world where contract negotiations for complex transactions in the future will mostly be focused on the two sides agreeing which specific AI tool to use, and crucially, what the inputs into the tools should be. That will most likely require much fewer hours by fewer peoples than what is required today, and that in turn will enable more transactions to be carried out for less money. This obviously requires well-trained AI tools and also well-trained lawyers. I would argue that we're not there yet, not even remotely, but the trend is clear and better quality can be achieved in the short to medium term, I would say, with better tools and further use of these tools by the legal profession. The next sort of daily task that any lawyer deals with is legal research. And that usually applies whether the relevant lawyer is focused on transactional or advisory work or on dispute resolution. There are currently various very detailed databases out there that each lawyer uses on a daily basis to research the relevant statutory provisions, the relevant case law, the relevant commentaries, et cetera, et cetera. Many developers currently are attempting to enhance these databases through AI tools. There's still a lot wrong with these tools right now. You can ask a developer these days to give you a very shiny trial presentation of the tool, and they will show you a very impressive trick where they can ask the AI tool to summarize basically the 3 key points of any relevant case law from a relevant case in 3 sentences. And they can do it in French, despite the fact that the original judgment was in English, and it all looks very shiny and very impressive. But even a relatively high-level look at what actually the tool gives you shows you that the tools aren't nearly as accurate as we would need them to be if we can use them on a more regular basis. For example, the tools are still very prone to give you miscitations or simply make up case law or legal principles as they see fit, which is obviously unacceptable for any tool that aims to be relied on more widely, even if not exclusively. The liability traps in this context are huge. If the lawyer depends on or like relies on that and that goes wrong, there are obviously liability issues there. And as we all know, AI tools are also very dependent on how well trained the user of the relevant tool is. So there would need to be a much more widespread training of many lawyers in how to provide non-suggestive and appropriate prompts to get the relevant output. Many of the big and international law firms have also developed their own legal chatbots in recent months, which their lawyers can use to put in any questions they have surrounding their daily work. And like Siri, the chatbot would then give them the answer to that question. Experiences with those chatbots are fairly mixed, I would say. Some report that the bots are really helpful for general questions as to what the general principles are. But some report that they are extremely susceptible to mistakes and can sort of like lead you down rabbit holes when you actually really don't have to go through that rabbit hole. Now, in any event, these tools also present very complex confidentiality issues. For example, it is of utmost importance, obviously, that you can ensure that the tools are safe to use in a context where you handle highly confidential client information. That's why the firms also have developed their own personalized chatbots and aren't usually reliant on any general chatbots out there because they need something that is internal to them only on their servers. But it is obvious that the use of any such tools will cause highly complex cybersecurity issues. And they also, again, as I said, might cause questions of reliability. What happens, for example, if a lawyer relies on a normally reliable AI tool, but that tool somehow produces a mistaken output? Who's liable? Is it the lawyer or is it the developer of the AI tool as such? Moving on to the next area, which is document review, and in certain circumstances, the production of a large set of documents to the other side in a dispute or to a governmental entity. That is a huge task that requires lots of resources in basically any case I have worked on in my professional career. It very often involves basically an army of lawyers combing through hundreds and thousands of emails, text messages, and other documents to identify those documents and those communications that are material to the issues in dispute. And most of this is currently still done through manual review by humans on a very complicated file sharing platform where you have to go through each and every document and then you have to tag this document for whether or not it's relevant or irrelevant to the issues in dispute. And as you can imagine, that's a huge exercise. It takes normally weeks, if not months, and it costs enormous sums of money. It is therefore maybe that particular legal task of all of those that we will see today, where there's the largest opportunity for efficiency gains through AI tools. And it has definitely been tried to achieve those gains. There are already AI tools out there that claim that they can review documents, large sets of documents, and either assist the manual review by suggesting certain tags, for example, of whether or not that document in question is relevant or irrelevant, or carry out document review entirely independently. I don't think any of these tools are anywhere near reliable yet. And at the moment, at least, they are also extremely slow and extremely expensive still. Indeed, they are so slow and so expensive, at the moment at least, that it's easier and quicker still for a manual review for the lawyers to go through most of these documents really manually and tag them, because frankly, a human being can tag more of these documents per day than an AI tool can. And in an ideal world, any lawyer would tell you that very high up on sort of the wish list would be a tool that can review a large set of documents and then can identify relevant documents based on prompts that you give them. So for example, in an ideal world, you would be able to ask the tool to give you 3 examples of emails within a certain set of documents between, let's say, December 2016 and February 2017, that show that the other side was still considering a certain contractual setup, a contractual structure. And then that tool would give you these 3 examples. We currently still do this manually. So in the lead up to a big hearing, for example, all of that lives in my brain. And that is obviously very error prone. It's very easy to forget about that. And it's also expensive because humans still have to go through all of that and remember all of that, and you have to then comb through your set of documents. So if there's anyone in this room who wants to develop such a tool, I promise you that the legal world will be extremely, extremely interested. Next up is the drafting of legal submissions and legal letters and memoranda. Now, I think that those work products are naturally not very susceptible to AI assistance in general. The reason for that is that the exact content of these work products should depend at least immensely on their intended audience. So for cultural reasons alone, a legal submission for, let's say, a German judge or tribunal will look vastly different and have a different tone and use different phrases than a legal submission that you submit to an English tribunal or an English judge, for example. And I would argue that you will always need a human lawyer, at least, to get those calls right and to think about what the intended audience is and the way in which to present this most persuasively. To produce really the most persuasive and not just any legal submission, given the specific circumstances of the case. Nevertheless, attempts have been made for AI tools that can carry out these tasks, and if we ever get to a point where those tools can work reliably and we have figured out the confidentiality and liability issues that I talked about earlier, then these tools could probably produce decent first drafts, but I would argue nothing more than that. Where you could imagine AI, though, being more helpful is in the context of case management. And for every case, there will always be a decent amount of procedural and logistical issues that aren't necessarily complicated, although they can be, but are vital to the resolution of the parties' dispute. With a lot of that, AI can help, at least in some way. You can see here on the slide a few examples of those ways. AI could, for example, provide transcriptions of meetings and hearings, something for which we currently still pay very expensive court reporters and stenographers who will provide a hearing transcript manually. There's definitely room there for a machine transcription, provided that it can be more accurate and quicker, or at least as accurate and as quick as a manual transcription by a human being. AI tools could also be developed to turn procedural agreements between the parties or between the parties and the court into a procedural order, which is again something that we do currently manually. It is vital for relevant lawyers to check that procedural draft then, but again, that should be quicker and easier than if you have to draft it from scratch. A file sharing platform customized for your dispute would be helpful, as would AI support for logistical research. As an anecdotal example of the quality of the current AI tools out there, a colleague of mine recently needed to research appropriate hearing venues in Zurich for a large arbitration hearing. And those hearings have specific requirements. You need enough space for the parties and the tribunal, and everyone needs their own breakup rooms, and you need catering and all of that. And for those reasons, you very often end up going through to the conference rooms of like one of the bigger hotels. And so my colleague researched those potential venues in Zurich and found 3 potential venues that could work. But he wanted more choice. He wanted more venues that he could consider. And so he asked his legal chatbot to provide him with a list of 6 appropriate venues that fulfilled his criteria. And what he got was a list of his 3 venues, plus 3 further venues that the chatbot had just made up, because there simply aren't more than 3 appropriate venues in Zurich for his purposes. So that should be something we should definitely change for the better to make those tools more reliable. And then the last 2 issues seem to have some overlap at first glance, but if you look very closely, they do not actually. The first issue is predictive analysis. So basically, there are service providers out there that can take a look at your case at any stage before it is done and attempt to provide you with a prediction of how it will be decided by the judge or by the arbitrator if you continue on your current path of your legal strategy. And such services are used quite commonly in the context of US litigation, but perhaps they are less commonly used in other areas of dispute. The benefit is thought to be that the relevant party has time to change its strategy, basically, and respond more accurately to the strategy of the other side if provided with this information. And these days, a lot of these service providers will use either a mock assessment by one or more mock judge or mock arbitrator, and statistical data and psychological data, and AI tools. And most commonly combine all of those factors into one database or into one search engine. And interestingly, at least the AI tool sides or element of those tools have been found to be able to predict the outcome of a case quite accurately. For example, there have been studies that show that computer programs excelled over human experts in predicting the votes of the individual US Supreme Court justices in upcoming decisions. They did not get them 100% right in all of the cases, but they get closer than the human experts, which, by the way, also can't predict reliably the outcome of these cases. So that naturally leads us to the last area, which is the question of whether AI tools can be able to, or will be allowed to make substantive decisions over parties' disputes themselves. The current prevailing view is that they should not, in at least most cases, be allowed to make such decisions. There may be limited exceptions to that view, and we can explore some of these exceptions in the context of small states in the workshop later and discuss whether AI decision-making can make dispute resolution more affordable and more accessible in those states. But as a general rule, and we can see here, for example, the very recent, it's a month old basically, the very recent guidelines issued by the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center, the general rule is that substantive decision-making is generally held to be within human purview and not AI tools. And that's the end of my presentation today. I'm very much looking forward to discussing these issues in more detail with all of you over the next 2 days.